Hi, welcome to the Feet of Jesus, where we are going through the entire Bible, one book at a time, and we are in Genesis. I am so excited to be going back to the beginning of our faith and how it builds and builds and builds until we get back to the New Testament. It's such an amazing thing. And so before I get into it, oh, by the way, and we're using this workbook. And so you can find the link to purchase this in the comments, in the description. So I had an amazing thing that happened this week, and I just cannot stop talking about it. It's God and only God. I've had friends of mine that are not friends that are in the faith, and so they keep trying to look for answers on why this could have happened, and there are no answers on why this could have happened. Let me tell you a teeny tiny bit of the story. About 3 weeks ago, I had an MRI on my breast MRI, and they found a pecan-sized mass, and so I was having an MRI guided biopsy on Wednesday. On Friday and on Tuesday, I had appointments with two different doctors who just really told me in different words than this that they pretty much thought it was cancer. And so I got to the biopsy, just resolved to do being a part of God's will, whatever that looked like, whatever that meant. And I got in the biopsy, and they had to put me into the MRI to begin with, to locate it and measure so that they know exactly where to put the instruments to do the biopsy. And it took forever, longer than normal. And they said in my earphones that you wear for an MRI, "Heather, we're pulling you out because the doctor would like to talk to you." So the doctor pulled me out and tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Heather, it's gone. We can't find it. It has disappeared. We're not going to do a biopsy today. You can go home now." So, I've been blessed to be a part of a couple miracles in my life, and that one might just top the list. And so it's such an amazing, amazing thing. And you know what? There is no way. I saw the mass on MRI. There's no way to explain it away, why a pecan-sized mass would go away. There is no reason why it would go away. And no, they didn't mess up the films. God just took care of it. And he took care of it for now. It's something that I am sure I will get revisited. And at that point, we will make a decision based on what God's will is at that point. But anyway, such a wonderful experience I've had in the last week. And go God. So let's get into our study this week. We are studying Genesis 5 and 6, and we're building up to Noah and the flood. My pastor likes to help remind us that we use Noah as this children's Bible story, but it was horrific. And you know what? We're gonna talk about the biblical adult side of this story, because it's not just this wonderful children's story where this sweet man builds this big boat and God calls the animals two by two, and they just start floating on this beautiful water, and then they float for quite some time, and then he sends it up. All of that is true, but there was a human toll that went with it. There are a lot of experts that feel that there were probably close to 1 billion people on the earth at the time of the flood. And do you know how long it took us, modern man, to build to the population of 1 billion? We were in the 1800s. That's how long. So there were a lot of people. I think we think of the earth being sparsely populated. It wasn't. There were 1 billion people on the earth. Now, go back to that beautiful water that the boat was floating on. There were bodies that were bumping up against the boat, folks. It's a traumatic thing, and sin is a traumatic, awful thing. And that goes to some of my main points this week, and that obedience brings positive consequences and sin brings negative consequences. I'll get back into that when we go into our workbook, but sin brings negative consequences, and it was horrific. Okay, just some interesting points about Noah and the flood and that kind of thing, though, I want to get into. I want to tell you that in chapter 5, we talk about the genealogy of Adam, all the way from Adam to Noah. And it's through the line of Seth. And so we have Seth representing the godly line of Adam, and we still have Cain on the earth that is representing the ungodly line. And that is interesting, and it gets more interesting. There is going to be a point where you're going to have to make a decision for yourself of what you think something is. So I'll give you that little hint for just a second. So Enoch is mentioned in the line. Enoch is mentioned in kind of some interesting ways. He is mentioned more in the New Testament than in the Old. And he is mentioned for an Old Testament character. He's mentioned quite a bit in the New Testament. So he's mentioned 5 times overall. And 3 of them are in the New Testament. One is in Hebrews 11, and then 2 are in Jude 14 and 15. So I do want to read Jude 14 and 15 because it brings some interesting points in. So I made a point to find it already. So it says, now Enoch. So let's think about who Enoch is when we're talking about the line. Enoch, it says in verse 21 of chapter 5, where we are in Genesis, Enoch lived 65 years and begot Methuselah. After he begot Methuselah, Enoch walked with God 300 years and had sons and daughters. So all the days of Enoch were 365 years, and Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Enoch didn't die. Did you hear that? Enoch was raptured up into heaven. And Methuselah, when you find the meaning of that word, that name, it means his death shall bring it. When you do the genealogy and you do the timeline and you figure out everything, Enoch died the year that the flood started. Methuselah died the year that the flood came. So Methuselah died. Remember what his name means. His death shall bring it. And he died, and then the flood came in the same year. So now that we know who Enoch is Methuselah's father. And then after Methuselah, we have Lamech, and after Lamech, we have Noah. So Methuselah is Noah's grandfather. Okay, so let's go to where I was talking about in Jude. So Jude is that one of those books in the Bible that is only one chapter. So it's Jude 14 and 15. So now Enoch, remember who Enoch is. We were just talking about it. That would be Noah's great-grandfather. So now Enoch, the 7th from Adam, prophesied about these men also, saying, behold, the Lord comes with 10,000 of his saints to execute judgment on all, to convict all who are ungodly among them of all their ungodly deeds, which they have committed in an ungodly way, and of all the harsh things which ungodly sinners have spoken against him. So Enoch was a man who knew God, who walked very powerfully. God worked powerfully in his life, and Enoch walked with God very closely and prophesied about the coming. And one of those ways he prophesied was in his son, and in the naming of his son, and then of his son actually passing away, and then the flood came. Some interesting things there. Alrighty, so what are some things that I want to point out? There are some interesting things. Before I move on to 6, I just want to warn us that we do need to be careful. We can't pass on what we don't have. And, there are people out there that once they have children, they want to walk with God and they want to go to church and they want to do these things so that their children have church in them. But you can't pass on what you don't have. And so that is a reminder to me that if I want to pass on kindness to my children, I need to be kind. If I want to pass on godliness to my children, I need to be godly. If I want to pass on respect to my children, I need to be respectful. And I think that's what Enoch did. Enoch passed on godliness to Methuselah. Methuselah passed on godliness to Lamech. And Lamech passed on godliness to Noah, and so on. So interesting points there. So let's get on to 6. We're going to talk just a little bit about the flood, and then I'm going to go back to the beginning here of 6, and we're going to talk about some interesting characters. Okay, so how do we know? How can we put the flood and change the flood from this mythical children's story to actual reality? Because I do believe that it is actual reality. Coal. That's one of the ways we can do it. I know, just stick with me. And it's interesting. So coal, do you know how it's made? I wrote it down. I did some research for you. And I wrote it down on a piece of paper, so I have to go find that piece of paper. Okay. Coal is formed when dead plant matter submerged in a swampy environment is subjected to pressure. Did you know that we can find coal on every continent? Even on North and South poles, there is coal. So what does that mean? It means that in those environments, at some point, there was plant matter that was submerged in water that was subjected to pressure. And scientists believe that that pressure could have been water pressure. So that coal can be proof that the flood actually happened. Furthermore, did you know that there are about 200, somewhere around 280 different ancient cultures that say there was a flood? And here's some interesting statistics. There were some sociologists that did all sorts of research on those cultures that believed in a great flood. 88% of them believed that there was a favored family that was saved from the flood. 70% believed that it included a big boat. 95% said that the cause of all the death on the earth, all the destruction of the earth, was caused from a flood. 66% said that the flood was because of wickedness of man. 77% that animals were also saved. And 57% said that the survivors ended up on the top of a mountain, Mount Ararat. Okay. And then many used a form of Noah's name. In fact, like Hawaii, the ancient Hawaiians called this man who manned a ship, who was in charge of the favored family, Nu'u. Interesting, learned that. Many of them have birds that were sent out. Many of them talk about rainbows. So it just goes to show that we have some actual proof. Oh, here's something fascinating that I found out. Did you know that there are fossilized whales found in Michigan? Did you know that there are fossilized sharks in Ohio? And in Wyoming, there are fish above 7,000 feet above sea level. How could that happen if there wasn't a universal flood? Fascinating stuff. I just couldn't wait to get this stuff to you and to kind of introduce the flood with some of this information. So I do want to spend just a half a second before we go to the book on the Nephilim. And so what is that are you talking about? So it is in verses 3 and 4. of chapter 6. So let's read those and then I'll tell you what I'm talking about. And the Lord said, my spirit shall not strive with men forever, for he is indeed flesh, but his days shall be 120 years. He's not saying that men are going to be 120 years old or anything like that. He was saying that he was going to give man 120 years of grace until a flood would happen, until the destruction would happen. There were giants on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of man came in to the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. So I promised you that I would give you some choices to make just for yourself. I would love to know where you're coming from and what you think, where you're leaning to as to what your definition of. So did some research and found that there are 3 basic ideas of who these giants are and the definition, what was going on, what are they talking about? So it says, going back here, it says, there were giants on the earth in those days, and afterward the sons of God came to the daughters of men. Sons of God, keep that in mind. That's an interesting thing. So who were these sons of God? Some believe that they were fallen angelic beings that cohabitated with human women. And I am not going to give my opinion. If you comment, here it is. I'm going to bribe you to comment. I know I'll get 1 comment on here, but let's see if I can get a couple. I'm going to bribe you to comment. If you will comment what you think your answer of who these giants, who these sons of God were, I will give you what I'm leaning toward. But anyway, so until then, I'm going to be neutral. Okay, so 2 Peter 2, 4 and 5 do give us an interesting thing that we could kind of help if you want to go that way, if you want to believe that they are fallen angels, we can look at that. So 2, 4, and 5. For if God did not spare the angels who sinned, but cast them down to hell and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved for judgment, and did not spare the ancient world, but saved Noah, one of 8 people, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood on the world of the ungodly. Okay, there you go. That is one idea of who those sons of God versus daughters of men may have been. The other is the kind of idea that we're talking of the godly line of Seth cohabiting and marrying into the ungodly line of Cain. And then the last one is that it was the rulers of the time creating a harem. All of these give you the idea that what was happening was sexual, it was wicked, and it was against God's order. It wasn't how God wanted things to be. So we're going to put the Bible away and we're going to go into the workbook. And on the first day of every week, we read probably 2 chapters in Genesis. The second day, what you're doing is you're finding the main themes for that week's reading. My main themes, I hinted at them earlier: the fall of man, being deceived and choosing sin, our eyes being open, setting up our need for Jesus, and the consequences of sin. That sin has bad consequences and obedience has good consequences. We're going to see that more and more. So this third day of every week, we are going to come up with our theological implications. Remember, all that means, it's a fancy word for what is God wanting us to understand through these 2 books. And then also our application of that. So my theological implication is all about consequences. Sin has consequences. If you do wrong, sin lies at your doorstep. In other words, it is there, but you should rule over it. And the idea of you should rule over it is in chapter 4, verse 7 from last time. And then the application, I need to keep praying throughout my day, starting with worship music. And this gets me closer to Jesus. It just helps my day start fresh, which helps me stay away from sin. You know, if I'm going to start my day with God and worshiping and praying, and then it just sets my day perfect. So then on the fourth day, we are coming up with individual verses that stood out to us. For me, it was, I'm looking at the wrong page. Okay, for me, it was Genesis 5:1. This is the book of genealogy of Adam. And in the day that God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. And then the other one was Genesis 6:22. Thus Noah did according to all that God commanded him, so he did. So my verses kind of bookend our two verses this week. This is the book of genealogy of Adam. And then at the end, thus Noah did according to all that God commanded him, so he did. Whew, that's a lot. So let's get to our study verse. On day 5, we always have a study verse. So a shorter chapter of scripture, and then we're going to get into some study of just 2 verses this week. So the 2 verses are Genesis 6, 7, and 8. So the Lord said, I will destroy man, whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping thing and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. The thing that stood out to me, remember, that's how you do it. An observation is just what stands out to you, and it's really almost anything goes. What stood out to me is, why did Noah find grace? And what is grace? So we've talked about it before, if you've ever hung out with me before, but grace is getting something we don't deserve. I get grace every single day. Do you? I do. So grace. So Noah had this intense relationship with God, right? And when we have that intense relationship with God, we get grace. We get what we don't deserve. It's a free gift. It's a free gift now through Jesus Christ, through the blood of Jesus. But it was a free gift to Noah as well. What Noah did was because of the grace he received. And so Noah was being used by God. And in my application, that is my biggest hope. My biggest hope in life is that God find me worthy enough to be used by him. You know, I want to be a part of his plan. And like Noah, doing that I do, I hope the doing that you do is an outward expression. It's an outpouring of the grace that I've received. It's not for grace. I'm not doing this so that I get grace. I'm doing this because of the grace God's given me as a free gift. Woo! And a lot of that is getting rid of pecan-sized masses this week. So friends, I am so excited to be here with you. What are we going to put at the feet of Jesus this week? You know what? I say let's put obedience at the feet of Jesus. Let's put sin there. Let's put the sin there that we don't ever want to be there and that we tend to allow to get there and we don't want it there. Let's do that. Let's put that there. Let's put a close relationship with him. Let's, male and female, I don't care what gender you are, but let's be like Mary, the Martha and Mary, and let's just sit at the feet of Jesus and let's let him just comfort us and love us, and let's soak in every ounce of learning we can from the King this week. So, friends, it's been a crazy week here at the Fowler House, and I hope you all have had a wonderful week. Anytime I can pray for you, put it in the comments. I will pray for you. And remember, I challenged you. I promise I'll give you my idea of who the Nephilim is, you know, who the giants are and everything. I'll give you my impression if you'll comment. So let's see if we can get a couple comments this week. So if you have not joined us before, please subscribe. we're going through the whole Bible, and I promise you'll learn a few things along the way through the grace of God. So I love you, friends, and God's got this. Mwah!